let us get to our guest. I'm happy to have Ian Runkle. He is the host of Runkle of the Bailey. He is a lawyer and legal commentator on YouTube. Well, Happy New Year to you, Ian. How you doing?
Happy New Year. Maybe wishing I was in Vancouver where it's a bit warmer, but otherwise things are good.
That's right. You're coming to us from Edmonton, I understand, right?
Yes, where it is very much frozen.
Okay. Who knew Edmonton in January? Very cold, Anyways, in your province, Ian, there is a notable story, and it's very much top of mind given what we saw in 2025 with homeowners being charged criminally for defending their house, for defending their lives even. I speak of Jeremy McDonald in Lindsay, Ontario, as a prime example, who had to deal with a thug using a crossbow that broke into his apartment at 3:30 in the morning when nothing good ever happens. Jeremy fought back, and guess what? Jeremy gets charged. But here we have a case, Ian, and I know this is right in your wheelhouse. Calgary police and the Crown will not be charging a woman in an apparent self-defense killing. Ian, what do you know about this case? And why does it seem that in Calgary, at least, as it pertains to this case, they're going against the grain? They are not using that caveat, oh, well, you used unreasonable or unnecessary force, whatever that means. I still don't have a definition. But what can you tell us about this case and why the police and the Crown are not charging this woman?
So the details that have come out are apparently she was invited to a home showing, and this turned out to be sort of a ruse, a scam. And she brought her father along, but she and her father got separated in the house, and then she was attacked. Now, I haven't been able to confirm this 100%, but what I've heard sort of through the grapevine, and it might be wrong, was that apparently the knife was brought by the attacker, not by the defender, which is also going to weigh into things. But in the course of this, the attacker ends up stabbed and dies, and she ends up going to the hospital. And the police have made a public statement saying that they have decided not to charge her. And that, I think, is a very positive development. But a lot of people have said, okay, what does this mean for me? And for most people, it's not going to mean a whole lot because she is in a very unique and, circumstances. Essentially, everything that you can possibly have here favor. This was a person who was known to the police, which of course is it's code for we know this guy is a bit of a troublemaker, a bit of a problem, if that. And there's this clear kind of ambush situation where she's lured under a false pretense. There's, and if it's turns out to be correct, the fact that she didn't bring a weapon, but one was brought by the attacker is also something. And the problem is that most people, she got very lucky because most people who are attacked by a weapon aren't going to be able to get the weapon away from the attacker. It's actually a quite unusual thing. And especially with, size differences and strength differences. And it might have been a different situation if, for instance, she had brought a weapon along. I suspect she brought her father along as, just like in case something goes wrong, it would be nice to have somebody there for support. But what if she instead brings, like just a little pocket knife? Would they have charged her with possession of weapon for purposes dangerous to the public peace for self-defense? Would they have charged her with, for the actual killing on the basis of, well, you used a weapon that you brought with you, so that's less reasonable. The case law has sort of talked about defense against unavoidable attacks. But the question is, the courts typically would not view this as like an unavoidable attack. But for the average person, this is exactly what we'd call an unavoidable attack because it's unexpected. You can't avoid violence that you can't expect ahead of time. And are we supposed to say that, women are just not entitled to go to showings? What if her father was, had passed and was showing, and she doesn't have somebody to bring along in support? Is she supposed to live her life such that she's just not able to do things? Or do we support a world where people can go and participate in these things and because they are secure? These are sort of fundamental questions, but a lot of people watching this were like, "Oh, great, I can carry a knife." It's like, that is not what this case says. That's not what most people are not going to have as many factors in their favor as she did. And this may also, the Crown Prosecution Service in Alberta has gotten sort of new directives to basically say, please consider self-defense a little more thoroughly than maybe in the past. And maybe that played a role. I'm not sure if it did, because quite frankly, I think this would have been an absolute losing case for the prosecution if they'd ever decided to bring it. I can't see a path to winning this one. As a defense lawyer, I would put this in front of a jury any day of the week because, you're just not going to convince a jury of ordinary citizens that a woman is acting improperly in using the knife against the attacker. But I mean, sometimes that changes. People say, oh, well, if the knife injury is in the back or something, and they assume that necessarily means that it would be not self-defense. The problem is that self-defense situations sometimes get messy. So you can see, for instance, in forensic journals and things, self-defensive injuries that end up in somebody's side or back because, for instance, a woman who's being choked, who manages to gain access to a knife. One of the case studies they were looking at was a woman who was in her kitchen and was being attacked by an ex-boyfriend. This is in a forensic journal. And he was choking her, and she manages to grab a kitchen knife and stabs, but the knife wounds are all in his back because that's what she can reach, because she's stabbing around to a guy who's got her close in. Well, that's a fact that might lead a prosecutor or a police officer to decide to pursue charges. Why were the stab wounds in his back if it's defensive? Clearly, this guy must have been running away, and then she ends up in a court process. And one of the big advantages that we see here, where they've decided not to lay the charges, is that means that she's not going to have to pay the costs of the defense.
Yes.
Because lawyers are expensive, and there's not a whole lot to be done about that. Lawyers have a whole lot of it, education that they've got to often be still paying back. They've got overhead costs. They can't really work for free in most cases. And so you've got somebody who may be the victim of a very serious crime. Like, imagine that they had decided to pursue charges in this case and that she's ultimately acquitted at trial. Well, a lot of people defending the system will say, isn't that the result we wanted, because she was cleared at trial? But if it costs her $100,000 to get, cleared, is she, has that really been justice? She'll never get that back. The court system doesn't pay people back for being cleared. And we should ask, how much should a victim have to pay to clear their name afterwards? What we haven't seen released is what this guy's motives were. And we may never actually determine that because he's deceased. But was he trying to rob her? Was he trying to do something worse?
It's unbelievable. And to your point, Ian, as the saying goes, the process is the penalty. Yeah, you're found not guilty. Here's a 6-figure bill. Good luck paying it off. Drea, I want to talk about the facts of the matter that Ian raised. And because I believe this might be a case when it comes to an attack, a male on a female, a 1 in a million situation. Here's a house where the man is premeditated in carrying out some trouble. We know that because he's got a big knife and he's not in the kitchen. He has the element of surprise. He is presumably bigger and stronger than his victim. And somehow, this is the fascinating thing, his victim disarms him, uses his own weapon on him. He ends up on the business end of that knife. He's gone. She lives. But all that being said, I think this is a victory in terms of common sense, that this woman will not be put on the stand to justify her actions. I can only imagine the trauma she probably still lives with, being ambushed that way. What say you, Drea?
Well, it's fascinating. I can't believe that she overpowered him. I'm so happy that happened. My understanding is that she was quite beat up as well, when they got a hold of her. And to think that this man was already known to police, we should say his name. I think it's Ahmed Shamaz, something like that. I can't remember, but
Shamaz Ahmed, I think.
Yeah, I think Ahmed is the surname. That's right.
Yeah, Shamaz Ahmed, already known to police, plotting to do this, even though her father's near. This is serious. It reminds me of the 2008 case. I think her name was Lindsay Buziak. It didn't end as well as what's happened here, where she was showing a home and then was murdered, and it's still gone unsolved, actually. She was murdered in there. So the fact that she was able to overpower, take his weapon, kill him to save herself, and thankfully not have to face a trial is just, a win-win-win for what's going to be quite the traumatic situation for her. Also, just another example. I mean, Ian, you explained how everything kind of worked in her favor as far as the circumstances go. How traumatizing would it be to go through something like this and then have to face court? Like, you go through all that and you have to defend yourself. And it reminds me of another case. This one's in the U.S. Where the circumstances weren't as favorable, I guess, even though the U.S. is better with self-defense. But for this woman, it was a pregnant woman, and another woman had basically plotted to try to take her baby from her and ended up tricking her to get inside of her own home. So inside of the pregnant woman's home, that's where the scuffle happened. And that's where she had to go ahead and kill this other woman in her defense. And that's a bad look. That's not the same circumstances, because now it's inside of your home. It's somebody visiting your home. What the heck happened here? And she had to go through a quite a long trial, which is very gruesome. And she lost her baby too. So yeah, so I'm happy for the way this went. And I'm reminded about Premier Danielle Smith when she was asked about the other case with the crossbow. And I just remember she's just so perfectly and nonchalantly said something along the lines of, well, if you don't want to be beat up, don't break into homes. I believe that was her who said that. So hopefully that's sending a message provincially to the prosecution services, to the police, which is not, I think it's RCMP out there. So I guess that's federal, but I think it's setting the tone in some ways as well.
And, Ian, I want to touch in the big picture of home invasions, at least in Canada, not in so many states south of the border. I think what grinds people's gears is that when there is indeed a home invasion, and as I mentioned, the Jeremy McDonald case where he fights back, he sends his assailant to hospital, but he gets charged. I've always been of the belief that when you are in your own home, that's the end of the finish line. There is nowhere to run to, okay? Especially if you have elderly family members, children in the house. It's either fight or flight, and at that stage, it's fight. What really enrages me is this business of, oh, well, he used unnecessary or unreasonable force. Ian, I have sought expert opinion. Define unreasonable or unnecessary force. What does that mean? An open hand, a fist, a wooden spoon from the kitchen table? I mean, you're a lawyer. This is your bailiwick. What is the definition, if there is one?
If anybody tells you that they can, measure this out for you, they're not being honest, because there isn't a good definition. It comes down to the very specific, precise, details as evaluated by a bunch of people who are sitting in an uncomfortable wooden chair later after the fact, making this decision as to whether or not your actions were reasonable. But the thing is they don't have the fear. They can try to intellectualize it, but they're not in that moment of, terror. Now, the law says that the actions must be proven to be, not reasonable, and that has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So it does provide some cushion there. But what we see in a lot of these cases is either because somebody is carried by adrenaline and they go what the courts describe as too far, because, for instance, after somebody's down, they give them a couple of kicks because they're in the adrenaline moment, or that, or you get that they're ultimately cleared. And being cleared is in some ways kind of a sick joke sometimes, because you get people who there's a home invasion and they lose the house as a result of defending it. They end up having to take out a mortgage on this house. And it's like, well, the thief wasn't going to be able to steal the house, but he was there and potentially, and you get people who break in carrying knives, carrying crowbars, carrying, in, the Jeremy McDonald case, a crossbow. That's somebody who's clearly contemplated at least that they might do harm to the occupants. Like if you're bringing a crossbow in on a, on a break and enter, you have decided that violence is okay. That person has decided that violence is within the context of what they do. I personally say that the law here should be changed, and it should be changed in a way that provides for a much stronger defense, both in terms of at a trial and providing for a broader sphere of self-defense would discourage prosecutors from bringing it. But I also think we should have an ability to bring a pretrial application, just to say the prosecution is not near a possible conviction here, and it should be thrown out early rather than a trial. Because, a trial on an allegation of, for instance, murder is going to take, 2-3 weeks at least. And, we should have something where it can be thrown out in a much less expensive and quicker process. But the standard I would set is something that says something like not just unreasonable, but grossly disproportionate to a degree that shocks the conscience. And I would sort of specify some examples in the law in the sense of, for example, by way of example, torture, any sort of SA violations, because I don't want to get you guys demonetized or the like, but like if you do the Pulp Fiction thing and tie the person up in your basement, that would be considered okay. Now you're into grossly disproportionate. But if it's just that you used more violence than we might consider, like if you don't want to encounter violence, stay out of violent people's houses. It's kind of,
yeah.
And the homeowner shouldn't be expected to react reasonably in a situation that they have never chosen, that was chosen, in fact, by the home invader. I think of these cases. There was a case in Ontario. You were asking earlier about, what is it like when somebody wins? In Ontario, there was a case that was eventually dismissed, and the prosecutor said it was like one of the clearest cases of self-defense they'd ever seen. A woman was attacked by her ex-boyfriend, who beat her up so badly that when she went to the neighbors to ask them to call the police, they actually thought that it was a Halloween costume. It was mid-October that she went in there, and they said, there's no way any person could have that much blood, so it's got to be a Halloween costume. It was truly horrific. But in the course of that, she manages to grab his pocket knife, stabs him once in the leg, and because of that stab, he lets go, but she had hit an artery, and so he bled out. She was eventually, the prosecution dropped the charges. But in the meantime, she spent months in jail.
Oh my
And
gosh.
you
Wow.
can't give her that back, right?